There's a lot of familiar faces in the audience. You know, a lot of you saw my talk here in June. Thank you for coming again. Also wanted to thank the UFMG students who helped put this on, right? This is a lot of work. You know, you volunteered your time, and this conference is going very smoothly. It's a very great conference, so thank you so much. Today, Smit and I are going to talk to you about AI and decision making. I teach AI at NYU. Smit is a data science student at NYU and part of the sports management program as well. And specifically, this is almost like a case study. It's a real life example of kind of the tough problems faced by professional teams and the military. And we'll explain how the military fits in later on. But one of the things to note is we got special permission from clubs and the military to kind of present the slides you're going to see today. So this is there's very few people in the world that actually know that this technology exists. So we're very happy to kind of share it here in Brazil. So as mentioned, you know, I teach at NYU. I'm also the founder of a company called AlphaPlay. You know, I did my graduate work at Harvard in AI, and we're going to kind of show different kind of special things that came out of Harvard and now coming out of NYU and AlphaPlay that are helping kind of make a new generation of AI technology in sports. So we work not only in football with teams around the world, we work in NHL and other professional sports.
Everyone, I'm Smit. I'm a student at NYU, soon to be graduate, and I'm studying sports management and data science. So thank you all for having me here today.
So I mentioned, you know, the things we're going to talk about are true stories, and this is a, you know, story that's about $6 million, right? So we talk about in the previous panel, which was really great, kind of like revenue generation and using new technologies and innovation. Another way you can approach it is a player, and you know, the Brazilian leagues know this very well, is a very valuable asset. You can make a lot of money knowing who's a player who's going to develop and selling it to another team, right? So a traditional way of looking at players is looking at statistics and how much they cost, right? And you're trying to figure out like what a value is. Now the problem with statistics is there are hundreds of statistics on one player. How does the human mind know which one is important to predicting that player's success and long-term value? And that's what we're going to kind of show you today, which is essentially new AI systems, the one we're going to show, and very few people will know that even exists. You can think about players not as stats, but if you click ahead, I think an AI can think of a player as points. Now, let's try to make this a little interactive. Does anybody know, I don't mean goals, right? The number of goals a player scores. What do you think an AI is measuring if they're measuring the points value of a player? Any guesses? So the points value is like the points to the team, the club that player is on. You know, 3 points for a win, 1 for a tie. So we're going to show you this kind of AI system that actually values all the information about a player and then just distills it to a very powerful value of the number of points, whether the player is a defender, a midfielder, or a forward. How many points does this player help in generating its club's performance or his club's performance? And on the other side, when you start seeing these players as points, then you can see them as potential revenue generation, right? You can see, should I trade a player that the market, the human mind thinks is very valuable, but I know with using AI systems isn't as valuable as the market thinks? Should I arbitrage on that? And this is a $6 million story that's a true story about this. So the true story is about a player called Duncan Maguire. He plays in the MLS for Orlando. Last year he was drafted. And last year, you can see his stats. His first year in the league, he led the league in many goal-scoring metrics. Super successful story. Only 23 years old and paid $95,000 US, right? A very little amount for a player. So this is a problem that teams face every day, which is a player does better. Should we extend the contract or potentially sell the player, right? Is this a long-term investment we want to make? Do we believe this player can succeed year after year after year? Or should we sell while the value is high? So if you think about a player's worth, like specifically in the MLS, you can see right here that the average team spends $375,000 US per point in the league tables, right? That's just this isn't AI, this is just simple math, right? Like how many points does the team have in the league and how much do they spend on average? Orlando's, I mean, you can see obviously certain teams have much bigger budgets, right? They spend more per point. Orlando did really well last year and only spent $150,000 per point. So when a club looks at player value, so much of it is about their own expectations for what value is, how much they're willing to spend, right? But what's very, very important to understanding the worth of a player is, can a player repeat or sustain their performance, right? Do they have the factors to succeed in the future, not just today? And if you want to value them, if you want to know how much they should be paid, who are the peers of that player? How much do they get paid? What is the market value of this player, right? So it's one thing to know the peers, but if that player doesn't succeed year 2, year 3, year 4, you pick the wrong peers, right? So we're going to show you, like in very concrete terms, how kind of an AI system helps answer these problems for clubs. This slide is almost a way of imagining how does an artificial intelligence even answer these problems? How does it think, right? And a lot of you who use LLMs like GPT, you can appreciate the thinking in code, right? When you're asking it, how, code this for me, code that, you can literally see the GPT thinking in terms of code, right? And it's a very beautiful thing to see how an AI thinks. And how an AI thinks when it makes these decisions about player value and points is that it looks at every player in the league. It calculates the amount of points they generate for their respective team. And then you can plot this by giving the AI the salaries, right? So the salary of the player is the vertical. The horizontal is how many points. So actually players over here are so poor, so below average, that they cost their team points. Players over here gain points, right? So if you see these two players, even though Handy gets paid a lot of money, he's actually, when it comes to the 15 points per season he generates, the average MLS, like the average league spending. So he's not necessarily a bad value, even if you're paying him all this money. But even if you pay somebody a little amount of money, they could actually be a bad value in terms of the AI thinking because they reduce the team's points in the season. If you can click one more time. So this is 2024 numbers in MLS every forward. This is where Duncan McGuire was in 2023. So he is one of the top forwards in the entire league when it comes to the AI thinking generating points. He's also one of the lowest paid, right? So the question at the end of 2023, when a team actually wants to decide whether to re-sign him or not, is he going to be able to repeat in 2024? And in order to successfully answer that question, an AI would have to, and this is what the advanced valuation model does that AlphaPlay created, it needs to determine whether he can sustain that performance, how much that player is worth to the team, and then also simulate replacements for Maguire. So this is a very exciting thing. Simulation is common in other sports like baseball. As far as I'm aware, they haven't had a publicly available simulation until now. We're going to show it, and we'll show it later in the presentation. So this is kind of like a comparables list, like a team typically does when they're trying to value a player. And this is actually from a top provider a list on Duncan McGuire. I think it's like one of the top providers in the entire MLS, like of valuing a player. And typically it's, a very limited data with just like an overall score. Obviously there's components that go into that score, but there are things obviously missing from this system that AI loves in order to get more accurate results, right? Some of these things are, the data isn't necessarily minutes adjusted based on, the player's playing time. Possession adjusted, right? If you're on a very, very good team and you're a defender, you might not actually have to do much, right? Because your team just simply has a lot of offensive possession. So you have to adjust the data for that. Another thing is like you don't actually see the impact of the team, the player's value when it comes to the number of points generated for a team. Other issues are like this is every player in the league. It doesn't filter by age. There's a lot of different problems, and I'm sure you all working with data know exists when you're trying to come up with some overall score, like almost like a video game score from 0 to 100. So if you actually take this list of, let's call it like the market's thinking of how McGuire was valued, these are the peers that come up. The problem is actually when you use like a more advanced AI system and you categorize the player's skills in terms of their points impact. So for example, a player that's 100 percentile points impact is basically the best forward in the league when it comes to generating points for a team. McGuire is actually this kind of black or darker line. The AI completely disagrees with the human judgment as to what his peer group is. You can kind of see that if you grouped him simply on things like XG and goals scored, you would have a comp where you're ending up paying him a lot of money when he's not really as good as the peers in the MLS. So here's like an example of actually kind of using the advanced evaluation model. And you can see that his peers that he's actually closer to when it comes to his playmaking skills, passing, defense, high value passes, each one of these skills generate points for a team depending on how good this player is. And these are, of course, aggregation of like hundreds of stats that the AI has examined. He's actually closer to the players that are number 22, 27, and 33 in, let's call it the conventional wisdom list, right? How a team typically values players. Now, the simulation part is like really, really interesting because simulation doesn't really exist in football today until now. It is a very common approach in other sports, right? Like every single baseball team is crunching simulations constantly when making a decision on who should be on their team, how much playing time, when you're spending millions of dollars or not, right? So if you actually kind of load McGuire into an AlphaPlay simulation, teams really love this because then all of a sudden you can compare him. Say you don't want to sign McGuire, like what are the other options? You can actually kind of plug in the other options. And what's really, really interesting is these other players, you can actually isolate their individual impact on the team's points, but then because their stats are a little bit better, they actually help the teammates playing around them also perform better, right? So it's a direct impact of the player and the indirect impact to the team. So when you think about this, like McGuire was the benchmark here, right? So this is like plus 3 points over McGuire, plus 2.5 points over McGuire, right? That's essentially what it means. So another way that the AI kind of thinks about it is, like, what is a critical success factor, right? A critical success factor is something that needs to exist, an ingredient, in order for success to happen in the future, right? When the AI looks at all the different forwards and the different players in the league, it essentially detects critical success factors in the player skills that need to be there in order for that player to have sustained performance, to repeat their performance year after year after year. When the AI actually looks at McGuire, it does not find the critical success factors present, right? There's some of them there, but not all of them. And it then calculates that there's a less than 10% of the top forwards in the league are actually missing these critical success factors, right? So that's already a warning sign about Maguire. Year 2, if you wanted somebody like Maguire who doesn't have those critical success factors to sustain their top performance, there's only about a 15% chance that Maguire is going to do that. Year 3, it's an almost 0% chance. So essentially, what AI is doing is it's teaching teams fundamentals of the game when it comes to long-term success. How is it able to do this? Because there's so much information out there that is not being used. So many different calculations that need to be made in order to come up with a solution. But what's exciting is that there's actually an intelligence that exists today that is able to kind of crunch these numbers and come up with these things to aid in decision-making, right? So this talk is about AI and decision-making. This is just one piece of information leaders use to make decisions. There's other pieces of information, some of them related to revenue, right? Like fan bases in global countries. How many jerseys are they going to sell? How many tickets are they going to sell? There's all sorts of other considerations. But I think a fundamental consideration too is, can a player actually perform year after year after year? So this is the reveal of how Maguire did in 2024. And he actually, dropped back down to like more of a mean player. Now he actually, is near zero when it comes to the points generated by him this year. You can see that like in 2023, at the end of the season, he was worth a lot more, right? After his kind of drop in performance, he's worth a lot less, right? So it's 7.8 million to 670K. So knowing all this, like, what do teams do, right? They know that players' values fluctuate through time, and it's all about timing if you want to capture the maximum amount of value. So at the end of 2023, a team can assess Maguire's performance, use an AI system to see, does he have the critical success factors to continue succeeding, and quickly see that the probability of that is very low. At that point in time, you could potentially sell him for a lot of money, right? What actually happened is about a week and a half ago, he got signed to a contract extension for $1.1 million a year. That's not to say that he was not almost sold. It turns out that an EPL team, or two different EPL teams, were interested in purchasing him, and he was actually on the tarmac at Heathrow when he was trying to figure out which team to be transferred to, and maybe they actually missed the signing deadline, technically, because of time zone differences, so he was unable to be sold at that time. So then he had to fly back to the US. Typically, if we go to the next slide, if you think about like a team's perspective, like Orlando certainly kind of dodged a bullet by not extending his contract negotiation earlier. They would have been paying many more millions, right? So they were smart to do the wait and see approach. But the $6 million that could have been gained would have been to, at the end of the season, use an AI system, see things that your opponents don't see, sell the player when they're high, and capture revenue, right? So the future is not about necessarily individual player stats or aggregated team stats. Instead, it's about kind of like assisted decision-making, where all these kind of formulas are used to calculate a player's value quickly in a very understandable way that a data scientist and statistician, that people that are not data scientists or statisticians even understand. And you then think about players as revenue generators and not costs.
Thank you, Brian. So I'm going to move on to kind of the second portion of this, where we talk about further applications, both in football and also in the military. So first thing I'd like to point out is that these decisions are ultimately made by humans. And so it's helpful to have the model to guide you to a number on how much Maguire's worth actually is, but there's a second step to that, which is relaying that information to the human decision maker, whether it be the CEO, the sporting director, or whatnot, to make that ultimate decision. So there's a two-step process. And again, the name of this talk is AI in decision making. So I'm going to touch more on how it might aid us make decisions. Can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so this is kind of an evolution of AI systems in games. This is not sports, but more so games. So in the top, you'll see IBM's Deep Blue dominated chess grandmasters. This was 1997. And then about 2 decades later, a very complex game, Go, AlphaGo, created by Google's DeepMind, was able to beat the best Go player in the world at that time. The common theme between these top two stories is that it's a human versus a machine. And even here, you can see it's the best Go player in the world against the machine. Same with Garry Kasparov in the top, with chess as well. But since then, now we are in 2024, it's kind of switched to where machines and humans are on the same side. And so the top chess players in the world, the top Go players in the world, they will use AI systems in order to teach them, how should I think about playing in this certain position? How should I play this move? So they're on the same team now. It's not an oppositional force anymore. It's on the same team. How can we extract the most value from our decisions using these systems to aid that decision making? And these are games such as chess, Go, poker, you name it, where these solvers or engines or AI systems have become very prevalent. But in sports, it hasn't been to that level yet. And again, there's a lot more variables in sports that we'll talk about in a minute as well, but it's kind of bridging this gap between where AI solves a game and we can use it to help guide our decision making. And now I'll pass it over to Brian to give a more concrete example with Man City and Man United.
So this was originally presented at the MIT Sloan Conference about 1.5 years ago. So that hence the game's a little dated. But essentially, we wanted to kind of show this example because it'll help you kind of understand how military technology is, specifically our work with the US military, is kind of informing our AI system, which is very different than what's been created before. Essentially what you could do is before a match, feed the AI information, and what you're able to do is kind of see your mismatches with your opponent. This is kind of like the first time you're ever able to have defenders, midfielders, and forwards kind of on the same scale of understanding what are their impact, right? It's very easy to look at a forward and see how many goals they score and assess their value compared to, say, a midfielder or a defender. But if you kind of, before a match, load the system in, there's players that are helping with the passing game, with shooting. In here, this is actually kind of an interesting example where it's saying Gundogan was a very, very critical mismatch to this game. Man City, at the time, was using him as the third most utilized midfielder when it comes to touches. And effectively, what it's also saying is Rashford, even though Man United was like very overpowered in this game, you can see their win probability is not very good. Rashford was a mismatch in the sense that his assist ability specifically against Man City's defense was so good that it decreased Man City's chances of winning, right? So, this is offense, defense, kind of supporting players. And I think you'll see in the next couple slides how this kind of overlaps with military.
So when you think about football, you think about 11 players against 11 players, and you can kind of think about this as 11 variables against 11 variables, and there's a lot of interaction happening where there's a pass, shot, maybe deflection, and just a lot of interaction between 11 variables versus 11 variables. And when we kind of chatted with the US military, we realized that it's the same sort of modeling that occurs, to where you might have 3 tankers, 3 helicopters, 4 submarines, all in your inventory or on your roster, or you have as players in this analogy, that combine and work together against the opposition in some sort of end goal, right? Whether it's to score goals, score points, whether it's to inflict damage, or invade some land or what have you. The core kind of concept here is that you have components that work together in different actions, working towards an end goal and a measurable end goal, again, whether it's goals or damage dealt or something of that nature. And so as we kind of progressed, both in conversations with clubs and with the US military, the analogy was very, very interesting because it was more or less kind of the same model, same concepts being used. And I think this slide shows it well, this next coming on here, because it's a very familiar interface, it's the same concept. And so you can kind of think about these different weapon systems as different players. Some players increase your win probability, some players decrease your win probability. And so you can have, okay, we know that green team is gonna win 62% of the time, but why do we know that? And then you can kind of go into your individual, again, players, individual weapon systems, and understand what your unique advantages are. And it's critical to note that this isn't generalizable, this isn't in every battle or in every scenario, but against these very two specific countries, these two weapon systems, just as you have these two teams in a match, this is the projected outcome using the simulation technology. And you can understand exactly why you get to a 62% win rate number using these different factors. And so lastly, I'll pass it off to Brian to wrap up in a second, but I think it's a good point to note that we're exiting the era of data and analytics and entering the era of intelligence, to where we can understand that Man City has a 58-59% chance of winning this game. We can understand that Green Team US has a 62% chance of winning, but we don't want to ultimately understand why, because without understanding kind of the basis and the fundamentals of that number, we can make decisions upon it. But if we can understand that because this weapon system gives us a significant edge, we should use that more precisely, then we can ultimately make decisions upon that. So it's moving away from data and percentage points and numbers, and ultimately, what can we give to our intelligence officers, to our CEOs, general managers, to our commanders, to our fighters, so they can be better informed to make better decisions that ultimately lead us to our end goal.
Yeah, an interesting thing to think about is, you know, teams are currently at the level at the bottom, which is like you're looking at individual stats. You're understanding team in aggregate stats, right? Now with, I mean, as you all know, the LLMs, OpenAI, it's really opening up a new frontier and a disruptive frontier over a lot of industries, including the sports industry. I think we're kind of very proud of our technology because we're going to be used in the US military's first AI war game. Our technology, specifically with generative AI, is kind of so powerful that they decided to implement it very quickly. And we can also see like clubs implementing it very quickly as well. And the reason is when you do decision making, the value is not in statistics, it's not in analytics. It's in something that everybody can understand, right? Can any leader at a club take this information and make decisions from it? But ultimately, there is a massive amount of data and modeling that goes into that very simple explanation, right? When you're using GPT, there's a lot of complex things that go behind that. And ultimately, that should be the aim of any consumer-facing product, right? Make decisions quicker, simple, easier, take less time, and then you end up creating more value for the end user that way. So our contact information is at the bottom if you want to scan it. But I wanted to end with this quote from William Gibson, which is, "The future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed." And I think a lot of you, especially young students here, know a lot about this technology and the power of it. And you can see, you probably have ideas for startups and things to do that you can see that there's so much potential to kind of use intelligence and make life better for people. You know, how does it do this, right? You're able to see things quicker, do things easier, and guess less, right? You have more certainty in decisions. But I wanted to thank you all for your time, and it's been really great to give this talk.